One of the best places to visit in Seattle is Pike Place Market, which is home to hundreds of restaurants, shops, vendors, and services, all within this multi-level space. Tens of millions of people visit this market every year, and due to this intense foot traffic, there is a perennial discussion of pedestrianizing the space. For some reason, cars are allowed to drive through and park here, which can be a nuisance. As someone is trying to drive through this corridor, the crowd of people may have to disperse to allow the vehicle through. It doesn't seem fair to have large crowds clustering on the sidewalks just because a handful of motorists drove into the market. The noise and exhaust from the cars is also obnoxious, and when the vehicles are parked, a majority of space is occupied by a minority of people. It's also not particularly helpful for other drivers. Since this is a popular tourist attraction, it is not unusual for someone who is unfamiliar with the area to enter Pike Place Market into their GPS and blindly follow the directions. It then leads them onto streets that are difficult to traverse, and they wind up being trapped for an excruciatingly long amount of time. It seems like an awful lot of headaches to protect a measly amount of parking. Getting rid of these private vehicles would greatly improve the quality of the market. People would feel more free to walk around when the sidewalks and interiors get too crowded, vendors would have more space to set up tents outside, and it would open up more space to make deliveries, since loading zones wouldn't be blocked by other vehicles. It is great that there are a lot of easy victories for substantially improving the quality of life in Seattle, and it would be even better to see ones like this be pursued. In North American urban planning, there is an annoying philosophy that every street needs to not just be open to cars, but welcome to them. It must embrace having vehicles pass through these spaces and park alongside the curbs, because the alternative, being a pedestrian-friendly plaza, is believed to be bad for business. The argument for keeping Pike Place Market open to traffic is that these cars are believed to be a vital lifeline, and without them, the businesses will suffer.
Pike Place Market is just an icon live-in, over 100 years old.
It works.
Oozing with tradition. But could tradition use a little modernizing?
Gotta have it, flair!
But to Jason Scott, who has been at the market for decades, shutting down this street would change Pike Place into something else.
There's definitely an energy in the market, whether it's people unloading stuff for businesses or tourists getting dropped off. Seems to be working all these years,
Mary Baccarella, executive director of Pike Place Market Public Development Authority, was told to stay away from closing Pike Place to cars. It's the third rail, she remembers city council members saying. It was one of the first things they told me. When talks of pedestrianizing Pike Place Market came up last year, Baccarella mentioned she was nervous about rocking the boat. Pike Place is a working market. How will deliveries be protected? What about orders through DoorDash or Uber Eats? Ultimately, at some point I will be gone and they will be left, she said of the vendors, and it's their livelihoods that I'm worried about. Even when talking about pedestrianization in the context of improving safety, she still comes off as being dismissive of the actual issue because she just doesn't want to rock the boat.
The market's executive director has heard it all, that getting rid of the cars would make the market safer.
There's a lot of public safety issues that we all have to deal with right now with downtown.
But she says Pike Place is unique, especially to the businesses.
They know more than anyone how this market works and how essential it is to their business.
Furthermore, this editorial from the Seattle Times argues that pedestrians and all kinds of traffic should be on the same playing field, saying pedestrians have the same right to be on Pike Place as the truck delivery vehicle, the rideshare drop-off, the restaurateurs picking up supplies, and the van dropping off Americans with Disabilities Act or elderly passengers. I really do hate this argument. Usually people who cite elderly or disabled visitors don't actually care about those demographics. They're really just clinging on to any and every argument that can be used in defense of keeping cars in the space, which is fairly disingenuous and outright insulting. The existence of more substantial vehicle trips is all the more reason to not just allow any private vehicle onto the street. Otherwise, able-bodied individuals are taking up resources that could be used by someone who might need it more. In actuality, most people are driving for the sake of it. They insisted on arriving by car and parking as close as they could. It's strange seeing people defend these parking spaces because this isn't even all of the parking at Pike Place Market. There is a parking garage with 800 parking stalls that people should be parking in instead because it's a lot more accessible than the spots on Pike Place. There is also ample on-street parking on each of the adjacent streets. So it doesn't seem like removing these parking spots would substantially reduce the overall amount of available parking. Are we really expected to believe all of these spaces on Pike Place contribute to the thousands of daily visitors who support hundreds of businesses across the market? Various studies have shown the opposite. When parking is replaced with a cycle track, more space for pedestrians, or outdoor seating, the nearby businesses wind up making more money. Parking is the least productive way to use the available space. This isn't a mall at the end of a car-dependent suburb, it's a popular tourist attraction in downtown Seattle. There are plenty of alternatives that would allow people access to the market without driving directly to these spots. It's not inconceivable that someone can still arrive here without a car. Getting more people to arrive by alternatives is actually a good thing, because cyclists and pedestrians may be able to spend more money each month than drivers. And the reason is because cars are expensive. After feeding the meter or paying for a parking stall in a garage, someone who arrives by car may not have as much to spend when shopping around. It's also more difficult to impulsively shop somewhere when you must find parking. A transit rider can get off at the next stop. A cyclist doesn't need much space to store their bike. A pedestrian is already there. Meanwhile, a driver needs a parking spot to have any meaningful interaction with the world around them. As a result, pedestrians and cyclists can make more frequent trips to restaurants, bars, and convenience stores, and have their total spending outnumber the spending from other drivers who are parking directly there. Various streets have seen massive economic boons when on-street parking was replaced with patio seating or a cycle track. In Toronto, for example, on-street parking that was converted to curbside patios made nearly 50 times more money than they brought in. As reported by the Globe and Mail, residents spent a total of $181 million at curbside patios within 13 weeks of summer in 2021. If those spaces had remained dedicated to parking, only $3.7 million would have been collected during the same time period. The thing about on-street parking is someone who parks near a business isn't really guaranteed to go directly to it. They could be parking for a variety of other reasons. But with patio seating, it is reasonable to assume that people sitting there are eating at the restaurant as an actual patron. An additional case study from Toronto measured the effects of removing parking in favor of a pilot bike lane on Bloor Street, and they found monthly consumer spending and number of customers served by merchants both increased. More people were shopping around because they could access those businesses by bike. These case studies demonstrate that there are better ways to utilize the space within Pike Place Market and the surrounding streets than parking. But the sad truth is, the businesses that are vehemently against pedestrianizing the space won't come around to making these changes until after it is done. In Vancouver, for example, the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association spent years fighting the separated bike lanes on Ormby and Dunsmuir streets, making the typical claim that losing the parking would affect their bottom lines. Those same businesses eventually became vigorous supporters of the bike lane after seeing evidence that the bike lanes were actually helpful for their businesses. Similarly, Houston pedestrianized 7 blocks of Main Street as part of the More Space Main Street program during the COVID-19 pandemic. The program has enabled participating businesses to add a total of 45 tables and 154 seats on outdoor patios. Bars and restaurants also reported increases in revenue, employee retention, and customer satisfaction. They also quickly recouped expenditures from creating the outdoor spaces. This change was so wildly successful that, after surveying the participating businesses, Houston City Council decided to make this change permanent. Based on all these case studies, it seems more believable that the vendors themselves like parking within the market, and they just don't want to lose their front row parking spots. But I suppose that's not as compelling of a reason as calling these parking spots a critical lifeline for the market. The only way to change their minds and show them that pedestrianizing the space is a good thing is to go right ahead and do it anyway, even if not all vendors are on board. The bold action Seattle needs to take to greatly improve the quality and economic productivity of Pike Place Market is pedestrianizing the space, so the hundreds of businesses and thousands of visitors can see firsthand how much better a place becomes when cars are no longer intruding upon it. The solution is actually really simple: an automatic rising bollard. These can be placed at each of the entrances in order to prevent vehicles from traveling into the market when most of the shops are open from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Outside of these hours, the bollards would be lowered in order to allow deliveries to occur in the morning or the late evening. They could also be lowered during special circumstances, such as a late delivery or an emergency vehicle needing access to the space. Pedestrianizing a space really is that simple. It just needs the Pike Place Development Authority to commit to doing it, even if not all the vendors are on board. I do want to point out that one block of Pike Street leading up to the market has been closed to through traffic. Apparently, this is a big deal in the sense that the last handful of mayors shied away from the change. But it is difficult for me to applaud it when it feels largely insubstantial. The original plan was to create a curbless shared street that cars drive down, but the city never reopened it to traffic. Now, the city intends to collect feedback and observe how the street is functioning on a street that was never designed to prioritize pedestrians in the first place. The new car-free zone doesn't contribute to making the downtown feel more interconnected when traversing by foot or by bike. There's a lack of outdoor seating or tables, it doesn't capture a whole lot of businesses, so not many people will reap the benefits of pedestrianizing the space, not to mention they only closed half of the dang street. Hopefully this can be expanded by closing the rest of the block, along with removing cars from Pike Place Market, pedestrianizing other downtown streets, and adding cycle tracks along nearby avenues, so there can be a critical mass of businesses who want to advocate for more economically productive spaces. When a street is closed off to cars, it becomes open to people. It transforms into a public space where everyone can relax and freely roam around, without all the nuisances of drivers forcing themselves into a place where they arguably do not belong. Not every street should be welcome or even open to cars, especially when that street is a packed market that attracts thousands of daily visitors.